There are no dormitories, no students, not even a football field, but this university is getting a lot of attention in these tough economic times. Utah Matters is next. Good morning and welcome to Utah Matters. I'm Dean Painter of KJZZ Television. Now, if I were to tell you that I was at a university right now, somewhere here in Utah, that had an enrollment of 20,000 students from all 50 states, that had been recognized as the next great thing in education innovation by Time Magazine and Network Nightly News, and that its president had just returned from receiving a prestigious national award for his innovation, where would you say we were? BYU, Utah, Utah State, maybe Southern Utah University, any others? You'd be wrong. We are at the Western Governors University, located on 7th East in the heart of Salt Lake County. And I am with the president of Western Governors University, Dr. Bob Mendenhall. Thank you so much for having us here.
Delighted to be here.
The reason we're here is because we want to talk about something that a lot of people are talking about, and that's the innovation of this university. It was developed in 1996, but you're getting a lot of attention and a very hard spike in enrollment recently. A lot of people are talking about you and what you do here, and it's a pretty amazing story. We assume because of the economy?
Certainly part of the enrollment spike, I think, is due to the economy. When people don't have work, they tend to go back and get more education so they can qualify for the jobs that are available. But we've really been growing in excess of 30% a year for 7 years. So we can't really tell which part of it is from the economy and which part of it really is just because we offer a different model of education to a population that's not well served by traditional campuses.
We're not going to assume that our viewers or any of us know anything about Western Governors University, although it had a nice large rollout back in the 90s. But this university is different, obviously, because it's distance learning. We are in this nice big building, but there are no students here. There's no dormitories. You have a faculty here, but they are, and mentors, but they talk to who and where?
There aren't even very many faculty here.
Okay.
So most of our faculty work out of their home with a telephone and a computer. They live in 40-plus states. You mentioned we have students in all 50 states. They rarely meet face-to-face, but there's a great deal of interaction between faculty and students via the telephone, instant messaging, live chat, threaded discussion groups, webinars, really every use of the internet technology to interact with others. All that we deliver is online. We really cater to working adults, so it's a different population than traditional universities. The average age of our student is 36, and 75% of them work full-time. While going to WGU full-time, we only have full-time students here. We don't do part-time students. But it really provides an opportunity for working adults and, of course, today for unemployed adults to come back and gain greater education and be able to gain jobs and better provide for their families.
What is it about your curriculum that makes it especially attractive for a person who's 36, who's working, who may be in the home, whatever, may be looking for another job?
Well, it's really our model that distinguishes us from all the other universities, including the other online universities. Of course, online is attractive to these individuals just because it's flexible and they can do it from home and they can do it at 3 in the morning if they have to, after the kids are in bed. But where we're particularly unique is that we have a competency-based education model, which means we actually measure what students know and can do. So we define up front the competencies for a degree, and when they can demonstrate they've mastered those competencies, they graduate. Really, whether they've ever taken a course or not. Of course, in reality, they take courses because they don't have all the competencies, but we don't require them to take a certain number of courses, only to master all of the competencies. And so we free them up to learn at their own pace. And it's particularly applicable to those in the workforce who have gained skills and competencies that go beyond the credit hours they've earned sometime in the past. And this allows them to apply what they've learned towards a degree.
As I mentioned in the introduction, is that you've received a lot of attention from the national media. We're going to look right now at an excerpt from a piece that was introduced by Brian Williams of NBC News on NBC Nightly News to show you what they're talking about the Western Governors University. Let's take a look at that right now.
Since Angie Gonzalez was a little girl, this is where she's always wanted to be.
Raise your hand if you can hear me.
A classroom in Miami teaching second grade.
Why don't you grab the paper, sweetie, so you can
But
get
getting
started.
here meant going back to college while juggling a job and 2 kids.
I didn't want to do that to my family. I didn't want to just leave them.
Angie was exactly the student 19 governors had in mind when they started Western Governors University 12 years ago. What Time magazine now calls the best, relatively cheap university you've never heard of. At $6,000 a year, an online, non-profit, fully accredited university. In fact, the online student population has exploded from 500 students in 2003 to 14,000 today. Here's what's different. Rather than requiring students to physically attend dozens of classes, instead, they work from home at their own pace. When they take exams, they do it at local test centers. And if a student demonstrates complete command of a subject matter, he or she can test out of that subject and graduate that much more quickly. In Sacramento, Scott Saunders needed a degree for a promotion.
For me, I had, 15 years worth of computer experience in various capacities. And so I was able to, sit through examinations with very little studying.
He earned a bachelor's degree in 2 years, then delivered the commencement address in Salt Lake City.
I never really liked school. For nearly 20 years, I was in and out of community college.
Nationwide, 20% of higher ed students now take some online classes. The biggest for-profit schools include University of Phoenix, Kaplan, and Ashford University. But for Angie Gonzalez and others like her,
I'm very happy that I was able to do it, and I'm happy that Western Governors University was there for me.
the dream of 19 governors has become her dream fulfilled. Tom Costello, NBC News, Washington.
I bet you were happy to see that on NBC Nightly News.
That was great. My marketing folks said, you want to know the effect of network television? And we had a big spike in leads and interest and ultimately applications and students after that piece ran.
Wow. Here's what Time magazine said about you. It says, "Go." This is an article entitled "Go Western Young Man." It says, and this is from Kevin Kinzer. He's a professor out of Albany, New York, who studies distance learning, and I think has written a book on the diploma mill.
Kevin actually did his dissertation on WGU.
Oh, really? Yeah, that's interesting.
Way back at the beginning.
He says this. He says, the article says, today WGU is the nation's largest supplier of math and science teachers in the urban school district, and its alumni are hired by such Fortune 5 companies as Microsoft and AT&T. WGU has earned a reputation for producing high-quality graduates, particularly in education. And then it goes on to say many more good things. You have said that your distance learning is different and unique among distance learning groups. Distance learning is not new. It's becoming more familiar. Most universities have distance learning, but yours is unique.
You know, most online learning is really using online just to distribute classroom education. So it's still a professor with 20 students or 30 students. It's the same syllabus. All that's different is they're separated by a wire. So it's the same assignments, and they submit them. And then we spend millions of dollars doing studies that say online learning is as good as classroom education. It's the same as...
Is that the consensus?
Classroom education. It is, particularly since the Department of Education last year, I think, no, actually, earlier this year, did a meta-study of all the studies and found that online education is as good, or in some cases a little bit better than classroom education. But that's not really the issue. That presumes that classroom education is good enough. And of course, who knows how good it is. We're really using the technology to teach, not just to distribute the same model. And what makes us really unique is that, you know, the average time to graduate with a bachelor's degree is 30 months versus 55 months nationally. The cost of a degree here is $5,800 for a 12-month year, and it covers all of our costs. So we're not subsidized by the state or some big endowment or anything else. It's simply a more productive model for the student and for the institution, because the content is actually delivered via computer-based learning rather than faculty lecture. The reason that's important is that students come to higher education knowing different things, and they learn at different rates. In fact, you and I learn different subjects at different rates. And yet our higher ed system says everybody needs 120 credit hours, they need the same required courses, and every course takes 4 months. So the whole system is built the opposite of what we know about the way people learn. At WGU, we just changed that. And because it's computer-based, it's individualized, so every student can study just what they need to learn. They can do it at their own pace. When they've mastered the competencies, they demonstrate it, and they graduate. Just by freeing people up to learn at their pace, we've essentially cut the time to graduation in half.
Wow. You said something that's counterintuitive, it seems to me. You said that in your program, a student actually gets closer to their teacher mentor than they would if they were in a bricks and mortar institution. I want you to talk about that when we come back from a break. We're with Dr. Robert Mendenhall, the president of Western Governors University. Right back just in a moment on this edition of Utah Matters. We're back on Utah Matters with Dr. Robert Mendenhall, the president of Western Governors University, administered at least, right here in Salt Lake City, the Salt Lake City area, but really a university that stretches over all 50 states. Dr. Mendenhall, you said something that we alluded to before the break, that a student taking a class online in Florida is closer to their mentor teacher who they may never see than someone in a bricks and mortar institution. How can you defend that?
Well, again, our model is a little different, but our faculty, rather than give lectures or deliver content, that's delivered by the computer. So the full-time role of the faculty is to mentor students, to coach them, to encourage them, to lead discussions, to answer questions. So literally, our faculty spend 30-plus hours a week in direct contact with students.
Where is this faculty?
Again, they live all over the country, work out of their home with a telephone and a computer. Interface with students via telephone, instant messaging, in groups, in thread discussion groups, and webinars, and so on. But we participate in the National Survey of Student Engagement, which most universities in the country participate in. And our students report a higher level of faculty-student interaction than our brick-and-mortar peers. Basically because the faculty that's their whole job, is to be available to students and answer their questions and help them through the program.
Yeah. Now, by the way, I've noticed on your website you have a graduation exercise. Where is that held, and who comes to that?
We've been holding graduation in Salt Lake City. It's kind of central, at least to the west, and we've had a lot of graduates out here. We may choose to hold it in other cities in the future. We get about 20% of our graduates that make the trip for graduation, but we get them from Maine and Florida and Hawaii and from all over the country, and they come with their families. You know, in this case, they come with their parents and their children. And it's a big family event and a wonderful occasion. In many cases, it's the first time the graduate meets their mentor, who has been with them from the day they started at the university until they graduated. So it's a reunion, even though they've never met personally before. It's just a great occasion to have graduates come and participate in receiving their degrees.
Talk to me about this stigma of an online diploma. We obviously know about what's referred to as the diploma mill in this country. In fact, as I mentioned, some books have been written about the diploma mill. How has WGU overcome that stigma of receiving a diploma, non-traditionally, from doing your entire college work over a computer?
You know, I think the stigma of online education generally is largely disappearing. EduVentures is a big firm that does market studies, and I think they report now that something like 80% of employers consider online learning is equal to classroom education. So there's obviously employers who still say, it's not the way I was educated, can't be the right way. But I think in general, employers at least are recognizing it takes perhaps a higher degree of self-discipline and diligence and motivation to complete an online degree on your own than it does a traditional degree. And those are traits that are valued in the workplace. Really, I think it's generally overcome. We're regionally accredited, which is the sort of gold standard of accreditation, the same as the U or the Y or any others would have. And you know, that essentially says this degree is of equal worth and of equal value. In particular, we do a survey of employers every year. We survey our graduates as well, but we survey employers, and you know, something like 95% of employers say that our graduates are well prepared and that they would hire more graduates from WGU. So ultimately, you know, the word gets around that you're creating people that are well prepared and successful in the workplace, and the degrees of value.
We should point out you're not a full-service university. You half your enrollment right now is based on in the teaching college. Is that correct? And you have what, 3 or 4 other areas of emphasis?
I would say we're a full-service university, but with only 4 areas of degrees.
Okay, gotcha.
Depending on how you define full service.
Yeah.
But yeah, we just do bachelor's and master's degrees, so we don't do associate or doctorate degrees, and in just 4 areas: business, information technology, teacher education, and healthcare.
Let's, if we can go back just a minute, talk briefly, give us a synopsis of how this started, because it's a very unique story, and how it ended up in Salt Lake City, being based in Salt Lake City.
Really, you know, this was the brainchild of a couple of governors who then brought 19 governors together to create this. But in the mid-90s, the governors were hearing from the employers, particularly IT employers, that they just weren't getting the workforce that they needed. And at the same time, the governors looked forward and said, we're not going to be able to always pay and continue to add dollars to the public education system. We've got increasing Medicaid expenses, increasing pressures on state budgets. That was before the recession, which has made all of this come true, so they're now taking credit for foreseeing all of this. But clearly there's less state money, and so they said we need to develop different models of higher education that are private, not-for-profit, that can expand access to higher education to those who can't access the campus, which include rural students in the rural West that don't live near a campus. But it also includes working adults who simply can't go to class at 3 in the afternoon, and there aren't a lot of classes offered at 10 o'clock at night. And so the governors came together and decided to create a new university that would be shared among the western states. Of course, it's now grown across all 50 states, essentially using this model of technology-based and competency-based. And Governor Leavitt of Utah and Governor Romer of Colorado were really the driving forces behind it. So originally we had headquarters in both Denver and Salt Lake, and some years later, after Governor Romer went out of office, we consolidated it in Salt Lake City, and that's why we're here.
Yes.
Plus, it's a great place to live and work.
Yeah. And speak briefly about the cost of tuition and how you fund yourself. You got seed money. You had a fair amount of seed money to get started. Where do you get the money now?
Yeah, the states actually put in $100,000 each to start, so $1.9 million. They went through that before I ever joined the university. But the governors were effective in raising private corporate donations and some federal dollars to help start up the university. But today we're entirely self-sustaining on tuition. So our tuition is, for most of our programs, is $5,800 for a 12-month year. Students go year-round. And that covers all of our costs. So we don't get any state subsidy or federal subsidy. We're just self-sustaining on tuition.
That compares, you say $5,800, that compares to what, $12,000 for a public institution, and what about $30,000 for a private institution? Have I got my numbers right?
In general, that would be, you know, in the ballpark. There's big variation, particularly on the public side. You know, in general, we're somewhat comparable to public universities, except their tuition is only 1/3 to 1/2 their real cost, because they're being subsidized by the state and other things.
Right.
So on real costs, yeah, we tend to be 1/2 to 1/3 the cost of comparable institutions.
We've got to take a break, but quickly on the side of curriculum, how do you come up with the curriculum?
Essentially for us, we define with industry councils, external industry councils, the competencies. That is what you'd expect a graduate to know and be able to do. We then develop the assessments to measure those competencies, which are some combination of objective tests, performance tests, portfolios. And then we actually don't develop our own curriculum. We go find the best available internet courses. There's now 2 million courses on the internet.
Wow.
We find the best available courses and acquire the rights to use them with our students. We map them back to our competencies and then make them available free of charge, well, for the tuition. Included in their tuition is all of the coursework that they need to take.
I want to talk when we come back on Utah Matters about the state of Indiana. I want to talk about the future of education and the state of education right now, in particular in this state. We'll be right back with Dr. Robert Mendenhall, the president of Western Governors University. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Utah Matters. We're at the Western Governors University located here in Salt Lake City. Dr. Mendenhall, let me ask you about the state of Indiana. It's an interesting story that I just picked up out of Inside Higher Ed, a publication.
We are really excited about what we're doing in Indiana. Governor Mitch Daniels of Indiana is on our board, and he asked us how we could bring WGU to a greater degree to Indiana.
He was having a difficulty trying to figure out where to get education for all of his those who wanted it in Indiana, and he was contemplating, how do I have to build another school?
Exactly,
yeah.
and we essentially said to him, look, we can create for you the 8th state university and run it at no cost to the state because we're self-sustaining on tuition. So in June, he announced, in essence, the 8th state university. We're not literally, because it's WGU, but we're operating WGU Indiana with its own chancellor, its own advisory board, serving working adults in the state of Indiana. And it's been a huge success. When we announced this just this past June, 1% of our students were from Indiana. In August and September, 10% of our new enrollments were from Indiana. Just the idea of the state endorsement. And of course, we had foundation money that helped create WGU Indiana and establish the brand. But you know, we think this will be attractive to other states who have their own fiscal crises and a need to expand higher education. And frankly, we can provide high-quality education without cost to the states, and that's why the governors created us.
Have you had inquiries at this point from other states?
We are talking to other states, sure.
Very good. And speaking of states, are most of the students from Utah?
No, our students are from all 50 states, but Utah has more than its share. I think we have a little over 1,500 students in Utah out of 20,000, so something like 7 or 8% of our students, as opposed to 1 or 2%, which would be a per capita ratio. Because we're here, we spend a little more marketing money here. We're a little better known in Utah. A lot of our early marketing efforts, you know, were associated with Governor Leavitt, so we became known in the state earlier than in other states. And we're a big employer in the state. You know, maybe half our employees, 600 or 700 employees in the state, and you know, we're still growing 30% a year, so we add about 20 people a month.
Yeah. Do you ever see a time you'll have to expand this building, your facilities?
We currently have about 4 floors of this 8-story building, and we have an option on the remainder. So our goal really is to move work home. So our mentors work from home, increasingly our enrollment counselors work from home, and that's our goal, is to increasingly move work home.
A question now somewhat related to what you do, but you're an educator. You've been involved in education for a long time. You were founder and owner of YCAT and worked with IBM in their education programs. The question to you is, and we just received a report this week from the Utah Foundation that says in states comparable to Utah demographically, we're not doing well in math and science and reading. Where are we in this country, in this state, in education, and why is it always an issue? Why do we seem to be underperforming?
Well, we're not doing well as a country. The president's pointed that out, but we've gone from first in the world with adults who have a degree to 12th in the world in our graduation rate. And for the first time in the history of this country, our rising generation will be less educated than their parents, unless we dramatically change something. And I just think, you know, we have not evolved education with the rest of the world. We still do it the way we did it 200 years ago. You know, if you think about a doctor falling asleep 200 years ago and waking up in a hospital today, they'd be totally lost about how to do anything. Yeah. But a teacher would be totally comfortable going to the front of the classroom and picking up a piece of chalk and giving a lecture.
Or a dry erase. Yeah.
Really, technology has changed the productivity of every industry in America except education. And in education, it's an add-on cost.
You're changing it in some respects. Are we going to be able to change as a country in 5, 10 years? Do you see this big barge moving anywhere differently than it is now?
You know, there's pockets of change. Unfortunately, most of the innovation is happening on the for-profit side, and they have other issues. The public institutions have just a lot of inertia built into them, and they're slow to change. So we don't see a lot of change happening. We wish we saw more change happening.
Yeah. We are back in just a moment with a final thought. Back to close up Utah Matters, Dr. Robert Mendenhall, thank you so much for joining us and talking about this win. We barely got a chance to talk about your prize, the very prestigious McGraw Prize in Education for post-secondary education. One person a year receives that. It's a nice prize, very prestigious around the country. And obviously your work with Western Governors University, very well merited. And thank you so much. And it's very interesting, and we applaud what you do here, and hope to see it get bigger in the future.
Thank you for coming here to visit with us.
Thank you very much. And thank you for joining us on this edition of Utah Matters. We will see you next week. Thank you.